Okay, this video is going to be on how to install Linux off of a USB key and also an installation through VirtualBox with Fedora 22. So I always use Rufus because it's updated for the newest versions of Linux and it's really versatile. It'll work with just about anything. And you can do this for Windows, pretty much any distro of Linux it'll work with. And this will make a bootable USB key. It'll work with USB 3 and 2, and you're not going to get errors when you install it. The only trouble I've had is with Kali Linux or different Black Hat, that kind of thing. Anything like Kali just seems to not like USB keys whatsoever, and I've always had to revert to a DVD for that. And for that, you can just burn a DVD using just Windows Explorer. You can just burn it right there and it'll work fine. So if you use Rufus to make your USB key, you'll then have a bootable key. So I'm going to do this demo through VirtualBox, but the same processes will apply in terms of installation. I'm going to be using Fedora 22, and you can now follow this to do a VirtualBox machine for Fedora 22. It'll work for Fedora, all previous versions of Fedora basically. And I happen to have 12 gigs of RAM, but I'm going to allocate about 4024 megs to this machine, and I will be using a virtual hard disk. So I'm going to create one now. One thing about RAM is if you generally want to use about a quarter of your RAM available to the virtual machine, that'll give you the best performance, or a third even. Don't be stingy on the RAM. Give it what it needs. And we can just go with a VirtualBox disk image here, and dynamically allocated. So this will allow it to automatically expand as it needs more storage, but I don't always like that. In case you want to copy a large file over, it doesn't always work. So I'm just going to call this 24 gigabytes, and I'm going to throw it on a RAID 0'd hard drive. That'll do. So it takes a little bit of time when you want to make these virtual hard disks, because you're physically making a 22 gigabyte file. So this can sometimes take a while, and once that is done, you will be good to proceed. So once it's finished creating the drive, you'll be at this window here, and this is where you can change around your settings for graphics, just basically anything you're going to need, especially the boot disk. So I've already been to Fedora's website and downloaded a copy of Fedora 22 Live Workstation, and basically the best and fastest way to download it, depending on your internet connection, will be through Fedora torrents. So you can just go to torrents.fedoraproject.org, and right over here you can get the Fedora Live Workstation right here. This is the 64-bit. There's also the 32-bit version. So you just download that, torrent that up. It's only 1.3 gigs, so it's pretty small. And once you have that, you will then go to storage, and where the little plus button is here, choose a disk. And this will be wherever your copy of Fedora downloaded to. So I've got a couple of distros here. I'm just going to go with Fedora 22 because that's the newest. And as for graphics, depending how good your graphics are, you may want to give it more video memory. So I've got 6 gigs of GDDR5, so really only allows me to use 128 megabytes anyway. So we can enable 2D and 3D acceleration. Sometimes it only wants to like the 3D acceleration, so you can leave it like that. You can definitely use USB 3. This stuff to enable it here. All my stuff is USB 2 and 3, so it's kind of awkward why it defaults to 1, but I have everything plugged in 2.0 slots right now, my keyboard and mouse, so I'm going to leave it as that. Next, we just start up the machine, and it may not like your USB settings. So sometimes you do have to leave it at the default 1. Depends on the operating system or the distro of Linux, and then this is going to pop up, and we just go to Start Fedora Live, and this will basically depend on how good your computer is. Another thing you can change is how many cores are dedicated to the machine, so we're going to change that once everything's installed. And you give it more cores, it'll be more faster performing. But I've got 8 threads, so I'm going to allocate 4 threads later, or 2 cores, 4 threads. If you're in a laptop, just in general, it's really not good to use more than half your available cores or threads. Then the rest of your machine is going to start to diminish on performance. So now that we're greeted with this, we can do install to hard drive. And I'm in Canada, so I'm going to go with Canada option there. And it uses automatic partitioning. This will work over USB, and if you were doing this over USB, or as we're using here in Oracle VirtualBox. So once you select the drive, you can just hit done, and it will automatically partition it. It may take a little bit longer if you were using a physical drive. And then Ethernet settings, it should automatically pick up, and then we just do begin installation. Here I'm just going to make it password. In general, you want your root password to be quite strong, and in terms of your just basic user account, it's alright, you can go with whatever you want here, but I always like a strong root password. Yeah, so nothing too special for the user account here, except it doesn't even like that. So once you've made that, you can now simply wait for the installation, and this could take, if you're using a DVD, it could take up to 2 hours. If you're using USB, it'll probably be quite quick. I'm installing this off of a 5 terabyte Western Digital 5 terabyte NAS drive, so it's pretty fast. My main system itself that the Oracle is on, I have a quad-core i7 in here, along with 2 SSDs in RAID 0, so it's going to be pretty fast. And this is using Windows 10. So yeah, you got my start menu here. So I'll be back once the installation completes. Okay, so once the installation is done, you can just hit quit, and it will then reboot your machine. In terms of your devices, we've got a disk in our virtual machine right now, so at this point you're going to want to remove your either virtual drive or whatever in your situation you're using, either a USB key, whatever your installation disk is, just go ahead and remove it at this point. And you can either, and I just always force restart the machine because it's faster. And your computer will then boot up to Grub, and you've got your recovery here, and you've also got just Fedora, which is the default, which boots off of it in about 3 seconds. You have a little bit of time if something happens to your machine. Rescue is extremely good. It's not like Windows. It is really, really handy. So once the machine boots up, I'm going to show some basics on how to update the machine and just some general settings to look out for when you're setting up Fedora 22. Other than that, you will be set to use Fedora 22. There's a lot of cool stuff with this. You can use Yum. It's a lot easier to install packages. And this is the GNOME desktop. I'm also going to show you how to install KDE, because KDE is more like a Windows environment, and GNOME is a lot more like a Mac OS environment, even though GNOME came before Mac OS X. So this is how you're greeted once you do your installation here. You'll get a welcome message, and just go ahead with the default. I don't like being tracked, so I always turn off location services. Other than that, Linux is open software, so letting the developers know about crashing stuff is always nice. It can make it better for everyone. If you have problems, that sends off to Fedora. That's a nice thing to leave on. Now you can connect your accounts. I'm not going to do anything with that right now. So we're ready to go start using Fedora. Alright, so first thing to do is open up a terminal window, and Linux, you're probably going to have to get fancy with terminal. You're going to have to get to know it, so I always pin it up here because I use it a lot. And the first thing to do is going to be login as root, so we do su, and we put in our root password that we made earlier, and then run yum update. And in Fedora 22 they've changed yum to something else. It's called DNF, but yum is going to work anyway, so you don't need to worry about that. And eventually it will update the machine. Now, it takes a bit longer if you use yum instead of DNF, but it'll start going now, so it's going to update everything. And it could be a while. Generally the torrents, they upload their copy, they're not updated. Even the copies off Fedora's website, there's a lot of updates that aren't in the ISO that you download, so I would just go ahead and update your machine. The only thing is, if you were using this for a firewall, IP tables doesn't really like Fedora 22, so it's a good idea to stick with Fedora 21 for that if you're thinking about using this as a firewall or a router. It'll work on this, but using an older, more well-built, stable machine is always better for a machine that's going to be running 24/7. Other than that, once all the updates are done, you'll be set to go. One other thing I'm going to do here is show you how to get the KDE. So you do yum install at KDE desktop, but you have to run it as the root user. So this will install the desktop environment that looks a lot more like Windows. It does have a lot better file management. It uses more RAM though, so if you're putting this on like an old laptop or something like that, GNOME, leaving it as the GNOME environment is a lot better. So here's all the updates. It's finally loaded. There's quite a lot, and I just downloaded this a couple of days ago. So we'll go ahead with the update. Only one yum command can run at a time. So once one is done, it will continue with the other. So that's in terms as that goes. Firefox is really the best browser on Linux. You can get Chrome, but I do like Firefox. It does the job very nicely. It's quite fast. And this is in a VirtualBox, so it's even running really well on this. Once you've done this, when you are greeted at the login window, you'll be able to select, if you click the settings icon, you'll be able to select if you want to use KDE or GNOME. But once these updates are done and you give a reboot, your system's going to be ready to go. One thing I do like to do is change my power settings, because I don't like the computer to turn off unless I tell it to. So I always do this. I don't have Bluetooth, so we can leave that off. And other than that, there's not too many settings you have to do. If you are on using DisplayPort or some sort of large monitor, you may prefer to change up your display settings or get some drivers. In terms of graphics cards, AMD really is the best for Linux. They have support for Fedora and Red Hat. You'll find that installing the AMD drivers is not too bad. It's actually pretty easy. right here, it's for Ubuntu. You've got just a plain Linux copy, and anything that works on Red Hat 7 will basically work on Fedora 20, 21, 22, and CentOS 7 as well. It's all very interchangeable, so you could just download that. There's instructions in there. This will get your drivers up and running. For NVIDIA, you need some proprietary drivers, and Google's your friend for that. So I recommend using AMD if you're only using Linux on your machine. I have an NVIDIA card, but this is my main desktop. My firewall runs Linux that just uses integrated graphics. But yeah, if you want to do some gaming or anything in Linux, you can definitely do that. And Minecraft will run quite well on Linux. We can go here and download that. And you'll also need Java to run this. So we'll actually do an installation of Java too, because Java is just really good to have. So this is just some general stuff here. I'm going to do an installation of Java. I am going to show a demo of Minecraft in Linux, because that's a game that'll basically run on pretty much anything. And I'll be back once I'm ready to show you Java. So if you go to OpenGDK at .java.net/install, you'll be greeted with the commands. So if you're using Ubuntu or Debian, there's your command right here. If for Fedora, Oracle, etc. users like us, we're just going to use this. If you copy this command and throw it in a terminal window, you'll be ready to go. And I've just downloaded the Minecraft.jar. In terms of actually running it, all you have to do is do java-jar, and then if I have it in downloads, and that would, right there, that would open Minecraft. So if I had Java on here, that would open it, and you'd be ready to go. In terms of installing it, we just run that command, and it'll install Java. Once our updates and KDE is installed, we'll be 100% set to use our machine, and it's going to be a good experience with Linux. There's a lot of handy stuff in here, and especially disks. If you've ever had a USB key that just won't work in Windows because you did something to it or something like that, often simply plugging it in a Linux machine and using it to format the drive, it can really help, really help a situation. Like, I've had drives where you yank them out of a computer and then Windows has no clue what to do with them with their partition manager, but Linux, it seems to always be able to repair or format a drive. So if you had a USB key, it's really handy to format it with this. It's really powerful. I hope you enjoyed my tutorial.